Welcome to Setup, y'all. Oh no. My laptop is dead. Alright. Let me put a charger on it. My laptop is dead, but I realize that I'm still able to talk to you guys. So bear with me as I let this charge up a little bit so that I could turn it on and be able to engage with you guys in the chat. It shouldn't take very long. But I'll welcome you guys to the live. My name is Natasha. I have a good one this morning. At least I really thought it was a good one. I'm up to the trial of Jesus, which led to his crucifixion. Wow. This has to be like one of my favorite discourses that I've heard Jesus make with somebody, and it's the conversation that he had with Pilate, who is kind of like, you know, the Roman official that is put in charge of staying on top of the Jews, which are under the Roman thumb. And so he has all kinds of legal authority to bring justice and to maintain order among the Jews. Okay. And so yesterday we talked about Peter. Okay, so my laptop is on. We talked about Peter yesterday, and we talked about what kind of led to him betraying Jesus, and you know how his expectations about how he would react in the moment completely fell apart, because his expectations concerning how Jesus would behave were wrong. And so naturally, when he finds himself in a situation and they're arresting Jesus, he's not able to follow through and do what he thought. Here's the noise. We have sound. We're set up. Okay. So let me turn this around. Okay. Let's see how this looks. I like to not be looking at my image when I'm doing these lives. Fix this for you guys. This is set up. So basically, because his expectations concerning Jesus are wrong, you know, he's not able to behave in the way that he hopes he'll behave. Okay, when he's faced with the reality of what the situation is, which is Jesus is not resisting arrest. Jesus is not going to rise up and use his power to stop himself from being crucified. He had told the disciples all along, this is the reason I came. Okay, this is the way. It makes me think of the Mandalorian. You know what I'm saying? This is the way. This is the way the Father has chosen. Excuse me, I have something here that was about to fall down. This is the way the Father has chosen to do this thing. You know, and yesterday I was speculating and wondering if, you know, maybe Peter just was off balance at that point. Like, I don't know how to flow like this. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't know this was, you know, going down this way. And even though Jesus had told them everything, you know, they just didn't get it. They just didn't get it. And Peter wasn't able to maintain his personal conviction that I'll fight with you to the death. Even if everybody leaves you, I'm not going to leave you. I'm even willing to die for you. You know, but when his worst nightmare happens, you know, he knows Jesus is able to deliver himself, but he doesn't deliver himself. He allows himself to be captured. And you know, Peter's worst nightmare is unfolding. And he can't get past his flesh to be able to walk in the spirit and follow Jesus the way Jesus is going. And we talked about how part of the problem is, Jesus gave him the key, watch and pray. Jesus gave him the key, not my will, but your will, Father. This is not how I want to do it, but I'm doing it the way you are asking me to do it. Okay? Watch and pray. Jesus said, your spirit is willing, but the chink in your armor, in your situation, is your flesh. It's hard to get past our carnal senses to walk this thing out the way God wants us to walk this thing out. Okay? When we go on and read, after Jesus has risen and everything like that, and God gives the revelation of Paul and everything, he talks about how, God is a spirit. He talks about how we just can't please God carnally, and that we have to walk in the spirit and please him by the spirit. And so it's so interesting to me how this whole thing goes down. Okay, you have these religious leaders who are so offended. So I'm going to summarize some of this because I had to read a little bit more today. I had to read John chapter 18, 28 through 40, and John chapter 19, 1 through 16. So I'm not going to read the whole passage to you out loud today. I'll read portions of it. Okay, but I'm going to summarize a little bit. Okay, so we see that Peter isn't a chump. Everybody has had, the other disciples have scattered except for Peter and John, who follow Jesus, because what happens is he gets arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he, had a habit of meeting his disciples. Judas, one of his disciples, betrays him. He cuts a deal because the scribes and the Pharisees are trying to figure out, okay, we want to arrest him. We want to have him executed. But the people are a problem because the people love him. They show up every day in the temple to hear him pray. It's the Passover. There's a lot of crowds. There's a lot of commotion. There's a lot of activity happening, in Jerusalem right now. Matter of fact, that's why Pilate is there. He's there to keep the order. Okay. And so, they're trying to figure out, how do we do this? How do we do this? How do we do this? And so we see that behind all of this murderous intent and intrigue, there's like a spiritual situation, a spiritual component happening. Because at the Last Supper, Jesus brings up the point that, one of you is not really, with me. One of you will betray me. And he points out that Judas is the one that's going to do it. And then, by the end of the meal, there's a verse that says that, Judas so submits himself to the enemy's plan that it says Satan possesses him. And then he goes out and he gives the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the religious leaders and them, the chief priests, he gives them what they need, a way to arrest Jesus when he's not in the public, so that some kind of riot doesn't happen. Okay. So, when he was doing all, praying in the Garden of Gethsemane with sweating great drops of blood, that was like in the middle of the night that he took Peter, James, and John with him, and they kept falling asleep, and he was like watch and pray and all that stuff. I talked about it at length in the last live. That was like in the middle of the night. Okay. As the night is drawing to a close, Judas brings, the scribes and the Pharisees and them arrange it so that, Judas is sent with a guard to go to the Garden of Gethsemane, which he gave them the intel to be able to find Jesus alone, to have Jesus arrested. So Judas brings them and goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. It's almost morning at this point. It's almost dawn at this point. Okay. And so they go and they bring him to Annas. Okay. So I can't remember which is which. Annas and Caiaphas, one of them was the retired high priest. The other one was the one that's high priest right now. It's like a father-in-law and son-in-law type situation. But apparently, even though the father-in-law is retired, he's the real power behind the current high priest. And so everybody's in cahoots. Okay. Everybody's in cahoots. And so everything goes down in this trial in an illegal fashion. And so they arrest Jesus, and Peter tries to stop it. Everybody scatters, but Peter and John follow from a distance the guard as they arrest Jesus, and they bring him to Annas first. I can't remember if he's the current high priest or if he's the son-in-law. I want to say he's the son-in-law. I can't remember, but you guys, you check your facts, right? They bring him to Annas first. Annas tries to drum up false witnesses, and the trial basically begins, but the whole thing is done illegally. You're not supposed to be doing no secret trial in the middle of the night, everything done behind closed doors. They have laws in place that these things are supposed to be done openly. These things are supposed to be done publicly. There's order. There's a certain number of witnesses that have to come forward. There are all these checks and balances in place so that corruption doesn't happen. Okay. But this whole thing is not done right. They pay off one of the disciples to trick and in secret try to arrest Jesus, which already demonstrates there's something off and wrong going on. And so the whole time I'm reading this passage, I'm thinking, wow, political corruption is a thing. Political corruption is a thing. It's not a new thing. It's a thing. And the whole time I'm reading it, I'm thinking there's a spiritual component behind this thing. Okay. The scribes and the Pharisees and them are operating under a religious spirit. And this religious spirit is a very hypocritical religious spirit. It's a self-righteous spirit. It's the kind of spirit that is promoting a form of righteousness, a form of godliness, a form of honor and justice. But not really, because it's willing to use evil means to quote unquote achieve a righteous end. So what they're saying is, this man is evil. This man is blasphemous. This man is trying to make himself out to be God. We need to do something about this. But everywhere we look, there's no legal channels, because it says they tried to find witnesses to try to do this the right way, to try to find witnesses to bear witness against him, in all of his super public ministry. They couldn't find two witnesses that could give the same story with an accusation that would be worthy of them killing him. They couldn't find it. So it says they just went right on to just finding two people that were willing to lie. Two people that were willing to lie. And they came up with some trumped up thing about how, he's a threat to the temple. He threatened to to destroy the temple. That's what I think comes out when they bring him to Annas. He threatened to destroy the temple, and that he would have the power in 3 days to build it back up again. So he's a vandal. He's planning to loot the temple and destroy the temple. Okay. And so that's what they came up with in the first, and was it, like I said, they're breaking their own rules. And so this religious spirit isn't really about justice and righteousness. It's more of a by any means necessary type spirit. And that's a historical quote. You guys could Google that. Well, a lot of people have used that. Even the Malcolm X movement had the by any means necessary tagline approach to it, meaning that you'll do whatever it takes to reach a good end, even if those means are not good, even if those means are evil. In reading through this passage, there's an evil spirit behind that kind of rhetoric. And it's not just. We're not justified because we have good intentions when we did what we did to get there by any means necessary. That's not true justice. That's why there's only one righteous God. That's why true judgment, true justice can only be executed through Jesus. You know what I'm saying? And so the thing is so corrupt. So they can't get, Jesus doesn't even have anything to say to Annas. They can't get anywhere with him. And so then they take him to Caiaphas. And then at this point, it's dawn. It's really early in the morning. And I want to say that based on how I'm reading it in John, it seems like the Annas thing happened then, and it seemed like it couldn't have been that long. And then it seems like the Caiaphas situation happened where, they're questioning Jesus, and then Jesus said, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, basically saying he's the Messiah, he is God, and they're like, blasphemy, he makes himself out to be the Son of God. Blasphemy, that's what prophecy says about the Messiah. What, he's making himself out to be God, and they are just, we have to kill him now because our law says we have to kill him. Except there's no way for us to make this happen legally according to the systems that God gave us through Moses and established through the law, and even we ourselves have established. They came up with this whole complicated process of how they do stuff, even to the extent that, they usually don't even conduct these kinds of trials during the Passover, because these kinds of trials entail dealing with the Gentiles, dealing with Pilate, dealing with the Romans, and they have this custom that would defile them, and then they wouldn't be able to go in and do ritual and be ritually clean enough to do Passover, and they're just breaking every rule that there is. It's corruption. It's corruption. They're corrupt. Pilate's corrupt. Okay. But what made me want to jump on here and do the live was the conversation Jesus has with Pilate. So he goes before Caiaphas, who has all the religious leaders set up, and he doesn't get anywhere. Jesus is doing nothing to get himself out of the situation, even though at any moment he could have opened up his mouth and pointed out how illegal all this stuff was. But he had already resigned himself. This is it. This is how this thing is going down. Let's do this thing. And even though they have him on trial, in his mind, the only one judging him, the only one having any authority to pronounce anything over him is his Father. So he doesn't have anything to say to these people, and in this way, he's walking out everything that Moses had them walk out ever since the temple was established, and on the Day of Atonement, they would sacrifice that lamb. He's acting exactly like the lamb. Lambs don't be up here talking like, why are you trying to kill me? I'm just a lamb. I was in the sheep in the field, minding my own business. I don't deserve to die for the sins of these people. Leave me alone. This isn't fair. Lambs don't do that. And here we have the Lamb of God walking this whole thing out without trying to get out of it, without saying anything, without pointing the sheer injustice and criminal proceedings that are going on right now. And we act like Jesus doesn't understand us. We act like Jesus doesn't understand social injustice and corruption, and he can't be our God. And we attribute him to people of what we consider people, we think of them as people of privilege who are evil and have no true love, and their God is a God that we can't relate to. I mean, read this. Read this. They killed him, and the whole thing was illegal. Nobody cared that he was innocent. Everybody knew he was innocent. They were just trying to get rid of a problem. And righteousness didn't matter, and truth didn't matter. And I wanted to come on here because of the conversation Jesus had with Pilate, because that is the issue of our day to day. What is truth? And how do we define truth? That's not a new question. That's not a new debate. It's not a new thing that people wrestled with. In fact, that same debate took place in the day of Pilate. He was a Roman. If you know anything about Greek culture, Greek mythology, philosophy, if you know anything about these things, you would understand that they were having those same kind of conversations, and they felt like they were so educated and they knew so much. And they had elevated themselves to the point where, their reasonings made more sense than the word of God. And we're right back in that place again today. And the conversation that takes place between Jesus and Pilate is almost comical. It's completely ridiculous. Just like what we're doing today is comical and is completely ridiculous. We'll have evidence staring us in the face, and for whatever purpose and whatever personal goal, the evidence doesn't matter. The data doesn't matter. The results of the study does not matter. What matters is that this end that we want to achieve comes to pass. Because what is truth? Okay? Because when we deny that there's one truth, any truth could stand. It's the truth that benefits the person with the most power that matters the most. The only way everybody can be safe and justice can prevail is if there is only one truth and we're all forced to follow it. Okay, so let's take a look at the passage. I'm going to read it now. It says is John chapter 18, verse 28. It says, "Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was early morning." Okay. It says, "But they themselves did not go into the praetorium, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. Pilate then went out to them and said, 'What accusation do you bring against this man?' They answered and said to him, 'If he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you.' Then Pilate said to them, 'You take him and judge him according to your law.' Therefore the Jews said to him, 'It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death.'" So, go through, this is so crazy. When I'm reading this, to me, what they're saying is, we're not trying to go through a process to kind of evaluate what this man has done, and based on what he's done, we're going to come up with a punishment that's worthy of his crime. We're going to make sure the punishment fits the crime. No, our goal is to have him killed. That's why we're bringing him to you, because the way stuff is set up, with Rome having this noose around our necks, we're not allowed to execute anybody. That's why we're coming to you. We can't judge him according to our law, or we would have done it already. We want you to kill him because we can't kill him. That's why we're bringing him to you. Okay, so Pilate's like, okay, well, what has this man done? Okay, let's look at verse 32. Well, let me go back to 31 because the sentence continues. It says, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what death he would die." Because he said he would be crucified. Okay, so we already know, like, Jesus already gives it away that, yes, Pilate is going to issue a sentence of crucifixion because the Jews can't crucify anybody. Okay, so let's continue. Verse 34, Jesus answered, verse 33. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again. So he leaves Jesus, he goes and he asks the Jews, "What's going on? Why did you bring this man?" They say, "Well, he's done, he's a problem. We wouldn't have brought him to you unless he was a problem. Okay, we want him executed." So Pilate said, "Well, you judge him and you execute him." And they're like, "Well, we can't execute anybody." That's why we brought him to you. And so Pilate is, okay, well, let me talk to this man. So verse 33, it says, then Pilate goes back to Jesus. It says, then Pilate entered the praetorium again, because he has to come out of the praetorium because they won't go in the praetorium because of their customs. They don't want to defile themselves. They don't care if Jesus is defiled, you know? Okay, verse 33, then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? Because clearly they've accused Jesus of being a troublemaker, giving Pilate an incentive to cross-examine him, because if the Jews are being incited by someone claiming to be their king, that doesn't work because Rome is over them. And the only king they should be bowing down to is Caesar. And if they're declaring that Jesus is saying he's a king, now Jesus is a threat to Caesar, which would give Pilate an incentive to deal with the problem. Okay, so let's continue. Verse 31, Jesus answered him, are you speaking? Okay, this conversation is beautiful. I don't want to rush it. Verse 33, then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? Verse 34, Jesus answered him, are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me? So I thought this was really interesting. So you have a Gentile standing in front of Jesus, and he asked Jesus a question, are you the king of the Jews? It's up until now, every time Annas and Caiaphas and them tried to engage Jesus in conversation, he's resolute, he's not trying to talk to them. But when Pilate talks to him, it's like Jesus stops. He's willing to talk to Pilate if Pilate is really seeking. So he asked Pilate, do you want to know who I am for yourself? Because if you do, we can talk. Where did you hear that? So then Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done? So Pilate's like, listen, I have nothing to do with you. I don't even know you. I wouldn't even be talking to you except your people brought you to me. So no, I don't care who you are. I'm not interested. You know? And Jesus is like, okay. And so that's interesting to me. That's interesting to me. We always have a choice. I think the conversation would have gone completely differently if Pilate was truly interested in Jesus for himself. The conversation would have gone completely differently. But let's continue. It said, you know, what have you done? Let's get this show on the road. Verse 36, Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here. Okay, so he's saying, I am a king. He doesn't deny that he's the king of the Jews. But he's like, do you really think I'd be in this situation if my kingdom was here and I was a threat to Caesar? Do you really think my servants would allow you to arrest me? If this whole thing was about me establishing a kingdom here with these Jews, I'd have people fighting for me right now. The very fact that I'm standing here all by myself and nobody's defending me and nobody's coming to my rescue must let you know this ain't about some earthly battle for Caesar's throne. Okay? And so now Pilate, a rational man, is thinking, okay, so we're not dealing with like a political insurrection here. This guy's talking about some kind of spiritual, otherworldly type of kingdom. That's not a threat to Caesar. That's not a real issue here. He might have a few screws loose, but he's not really a political threat that I need to get involved with. You can see the wheels in Pilate's mind turning because of what he says in verse 37. Pilate therefore said to him, are you a king then? Jesus answered, you say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. And so he's telling Pilate, yes, I am a king. Okay. I'm bringing truth. What my purpose was to come here to bring the truth. And we know from other verses, Jesus says, I am the truth. I am the way. I am the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. So in essence, Pilate has truth standing right in front of him. And so now he realizes, okay, we're not talking about political matters right now. My only concern is dealing with this man on to maintain the peace. Is Passover. I need to maintain the peace. I don't want any kind of insurrection, any type of craziness going on. These religious leaders are incensed and demanding I do something about a political threat. And this man is talking about a kingdom that's not from here. Now he's saying he's the truth. Okay. Clearly, Pilate is not engaged in the conversation Jesus is trying to have with him. Okay? Because when Jesus says that to him, in verse 36, it says, Pilate said to him, what is truth? What is truth? He's like, I came to bring truth. So, if you're a person interested in truth, you would then ask him, what truth are you bringing? What are you talking about? But Pilate's not interested in truth. Okay? And if you go back and you research Pilate and what kind of man he is, he's known to be very corrupt. He's known to be brutal and savage, evil, has a track record of executing people he knows are innocent. Track record. No problem. Super corrupt, super evil, remorseless. Okay. And I guess he gets by saying stuff like, what is truth? Truth is relative. Truth is relative. What is truth? My truth is, I'm going to do this because it creates for me an end that I'm interested in. And so it's good. For me, it's good. So it is good. Justice doesn't matter. Righteousness doesn't matter. What matters is that I achieve the end that I want to achieve. That's the truth for me. So if I had to face a truth and a right and wrong based on somebody else's standards, it would interfere with me being able to do what I want to do. And at the end of the day, I just want to do what I want to do. And I don't want anybody telling me I can't do it. So it suits my purposes for truth to be relative. It's whatever works for me. It's whatever feels good to me. It's whatever makes sense to me. And so the minute Jesus talks about truth and goes in that direction, Pilate says, what is truth? He's done with the conversation. He's done with seeking anything from Jesus. Okay? Because he goes, what is truth? And when he said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no fault with him. So after that conversation, he's like, you might be crazy, but you're no threat to Caesar. This man is innocent. Let him go. That was his conclusion. Okay, but let's see what goes down. In verse 39, he goes, this man is not a threat. I have a solution to this problem. We could quickly resolve this situation right now. Okay, he says, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no fault in him at all. But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release you to the king of the Jews? Then they all cried out again, saying, not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. And I think I've read he was an insurrectionist. He was just a really bad guy. I think I even read somewhere that he was even a murderer. He was a really bad guy. To release him back into the community demonstrates that, you know, they would rather deal with any more crimes he commits and any more harm that he does to the people who they really don't care about to reach the end that they want, which is execution of Jesus. It's worth it to them to release a criminal. So Pilate's like, I'll take care of this. Let's, just release him, choose him as compared to Barabbas, and, let this innocent man go. Okay. And based on what I'm reading about Pilate, historically, something that I always think about is, wow, even his interaction with Pilate demonstrates that Jesus is somebody different. Jesus is on another level. Because based on Pilate's track record, he should have had no problems issuing the death sentence to Jesus. He's done it before. Okay. But it's almost like the rocks crying out against, the injustice of it. It's almost like, it goes against everything for him to be condemned, yet he has to be condemned. He has to fulfill his Father's command. He has to die for us. He has to create a path for righteousness. Okay. But every just, righteous means would have wanted to stop this lie from happening, to stop this injustice from going down. Okay. But nevertheless, God himself is pushing this thing through and pushing this thing forward. Because Pilate, who should have been down with all these schemes, even Pilate is like, let's let this man go. Okay. But how he really feels about the Jews comes out, because he doesn't say to Jesus, you're not a king. What kind of king are you? There's only one king. Caesar's the king. Go, you need some therapy. He doesn't do that. He's like, oh, you think you're a king? Okay, this is the king of the Jews. Let's do his contempt for the Jews, Satan's contempt for the Jews is evident, because now they're going to accept Jesus's title as the king, and they're going to treat the king of the Jews with the utmost level of humiliation, abuse, and mockery possible. Okay? So when they tell Pilate Barabbas, they rather him take Barabbas, then Pilate starts the proceedings for crucifixion, which are horrific. Okay? So the first thing he does in chapter 19, it says, so then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. And, you can read about, it's terrible. Beating you with a whip that has little bits of sharp things on the end of it to rip the flesh off of your body. And then I think he took some crazy amount of lashes. So many people died from the beating alone. So first they beat him, tore him up, okay? And then it says the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, because you're a king, you need a crown. We're going to give you a crown of thorns for that stuff to dig into your head and draw blood. So they shoved this crown on his head. And then they said they put on him a purple robe. And then they said, "Hail, King of the Jews." And they struck him with their hands. And it says, there's some passages, some accounts that said they ripped out his beard and they spit on him and they mocked him. King, here's your king, here's your king. And they're mocking, and, and the chief priests and the Pharisees gave Jesus to them, gave them the ammunition that they needed to humiliate and insult not only Jesus, but the Jews as a whole. This is your king. This is how we treat your king. Your king is weak. Your king is useless. Your king can't fight for himself. Your king can't defend himself. Your king is powerless. Your king can't do anything. Your king is just like you, you pitiful, worthless Jews. And the whole scene has such spiritual connotations to it. There's a whole spirit behind that, you know? And that religious spirit that these Pharisees and the religious leaders are operating under, you know, they're willing they're willing to go through that to get what they want, which is Jesus's execution. Not my king, not my king, not my king. But now the name of the Jews is being dragged through the mud. And it's all good as long as I get what I want, as long as we get what we want, which is to crucify Jesus. Could you imagine? Could you imagine? You know, and then it says that Pilate brings them out before the people and he puts the question to the people, should we crucify this dude? Look, you know, he thought to himself, he's gotten a real good beating. We've humiliated him, taken him down a couple of notches with his declaration that he was a king. Isn't this enough? Here, I'm offering you guys a solution to this problem. I can let Barabbas die and let Jesus go, because we have this custom where I let somebody go for you on the Passover anyway. We've humbled this dude enough. After all, we all know he's innocent. Let's just let him go. And could you imagine these same people, you know, the chief priests and the Pharisees are yelling, crucify him. No, we don't want you to release Barabbas. Crucify him, crucify him. And some accounts say they incited the other people, the rest of the people, to also join them with this declaration. Because I think what happened to everybody is, because before this, you know, with him feeding the 5,000 and raising Lazarus from the dead, and when he comes into Jerusalem, you know what I'm saying? They want him to be their king, and they're hailing him as their Messiah king. This is only days ago, you know, and every time he gets up early and he's teaching in the temple, they go to see him. He showed such authority, such power, clearing out the temple with a whip, and they couldn't even stop him. They could get behind that. You know what I'm saying? But this king that they're looking at right now, you know, I've read that the beating made him almost unrecognizable. He would have been a bloody mess. You know, was he even able to stand strong in his own strength after that beating and everything that they did to him? Did he look like he was wobbling? He looked like he couldn't do anything. And he wasn't stopping anything. You know, was it like they were doing stuff like, look, slap? He didn't do anything to stop him. Are you trying to get behind this king? And they must have looked at Jesus and they were like, wow, he can't be the Messiah then. I thought he was, but he can't be. I mean, surely this can't be him, because based on what the prophecy says about him, how he's going to come and nothing's going to be able to stop him. And at his very coming, all opposition is going to fall apart. And how he's going to execute vengeance. He's going to rule with an iron hand. This can't be him. He's letting the Romans tear him up. And his condition is visible evidence of the power and the strength of the Roman government. If they could do that to him, we're next. We don't want to be next. We don't want to be associated with him. I thought that might be him, but man, this can't be the Messiah. This can't be. I don't want him at all then. The chief priests and them, they're right. Let's get rid of him. And so they start crying out, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. Okay? And so all the time I'm reading this, the only thing I can think about is it's really, really hard to get past your senses. It's really hard. It's really hard to get past what you're seeing, what you're looking at, what you're feeling in that moment. Can you imagine the amount of horror, the amount of fear, you know? And then that would have turned to rage against him rather than to stand in the face of the sheer disappointment that, wow, this guy isn't who we had hoped he would be. We're going to have to continue under this oppression for a while longer because this guy is not it. Rather than to sit there in that level of disappointment, I think everything would have turned to rage and disgust looking at him. How dare you fool us like this and trick us like this when you're not him? You deserve to die. It is blasphemy, everything that you said. Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. Now, of course, not everybody felt that way. The disciples still, you know, as we follow through, you know, they're heartbroken, they're disappointed, they're confused and everything like that. But clearly they haven't turned their hearts toward wanting Jesus dead forever, okay? Because they do receive him with joy when he is resurrected. And there are, you know, you have people like Nicodemus and the dude with the tomb. His name just flew out of my head. Coming in and getting Jesus's body. You know what I'm saying? It's not that everybody's heart turned that way, but I think if your heart didn't turn toward sheer anger, fury, and disgust, you just felt completely horrified by the whole thing and completely helpless, so disappointed, so confused. What's gonna happen now? Wow. It's so hard. I mean, it would have been almost impossible. I just can't even imagine. Were they going to look through all of that, everything that their mind, everything that they were experiencing to be able to hold on to what Jesus said, that he would do what no one else has ever done, what they haven't even seen him do? It's one thing for him to raise everybody else from the dead, but once you're dead, you're dead. How are you going to raise yourself from the dead? You know, they had to believe that the Father, whom they couldn't see, would raise him from the dead. They had to believe that. It took a lot to believe that. Because even though he told them that this was going to happen, that this, all of it, the beatings, the arrests, the corrupt trial, he told them all of this was going to happen. And it's prophesied. It's in prophecy. They had the prophecies that all of this would happen. Now that it's happening, they have to be able to get through their senses to believe that that the rest of what it says would happen also. And this is a huge leap of faith. It's a huge leap of faith. And none of them were able to really make it. You know, it has to happen. And then Jesus has to reveal himself to them. They have to see him. They have to touch him for them to know that what he said was true. Because it's hard to get past your senses. It's hard to get past your senses. But God has given us the way. He's given us the example through what Jesus did. Watch and pray and walk this out. Not my will, but your will. Walk this out. And live by the word, the way Jesus lived by the word, and speak the word only, the way Jesus spoke the word only. When he was tempted by Satan, his defense was the word. When he talked to the scribes and the Pharisees, his defense was the word. Okay? So when you say that this word, you know, has been mangled and messed up, it contradicts itself, it's not really relevant, I don't understand it, we've messed up the translations, you've gotten rid of your sword, you have no weapon. How are you going to stand? Because those are all lies of the enemy to take your sword away from you. That's why I do these lives. That's why I spend so much time in the word. You can't live by the truth unless you know the truth. And you can't be free without the actual truth. Okay? And there's a spiritual component behind everything that's happening. And we have this example that it's not going to be a pretty picture to follow the intent of the enemy all the way to the end. But praise be to God, because Jesus has done everything necessary to overcome our enemy. And he's done everything necessary to help us to get past our flesh. We just have to be willing to do it. So you guys, that's all I have for you today. That's all I have for you today. So I'm going to end this live, and I will catch you guys in the next live because I don't see anything in the chat. You guys have a blessed day.